Many designers overlook the importance of composition, but there are many techniques that you can use to help improve your designs. For this guided critique, I'm going to take you through a series of real-world projects to help you improve your layout and composition skills within InDesign. Let's look at ways to create visual relationships using the example of a business card. A business card might seem like an easy project, but it's challenging to fit so much information into such a limited space and have it look visually compelling. These things will not change. It's a standard business card, 3.5 by 2 inches in horizontal format. Now, of course, there can be some variations in terms of the sizing, but they are kept relatively pocket size. And sometimes vertical business cards can work really well, but for our purposes, we're sticking with horizontal. The typeface I'm also using is Chaparral Pro, and the size is 8 point with a leading of 9.5. The person's name is in bold, and according to the branding guidelines, the logo has to be set at least 1 inch wide. This configuration of elements activates the white space in the top right. Alternatively, we can have the white space on the left. Here I've arranged all the text as one block with a half-line space between each section. The live area is the area inside the margins, which in this example are set to 1/8 of an inch, or 0.125 inches in decimal form. The edges of the text are aligned. Within each text block, the text is left aligned, creating a uniformity of style and adding asymmetry. Asymmetry because there is varying amount of white space at the end of each line. But just applying a design principle is no guarantee that the results will look good. In this case, my arrangement of elements creates an awkward area of white space in the center of the card. When we refer to white space, we mean unoccupied space, regardless of its actual color. Almost every design has white space. Ideally, this white space will be incorporated into the design and used actively. Now let's look at experimenting with different configurations. Here I've recombined the address with the phone number and email address. Perhaps there's no reason to separate these elements. I've moved the name and title in closer proximity to the logo. Rather than break the information into 4 chunks, we're now working with 2 chunks of information. This creates a better flow of white space from bottom left through to top right. In this example, I've increased the scale of the logo. Now, rather than have all the elements at the same or similar sizes, we have a clear distinction by scale. The name and title are moved down to align on the same baseline as the type on the right. I've added a half-line space above the telephone number to differentiate it, while at the same time retaining the information as one block of text. This configuration of elements activates the white space in the top right. Alternatively, we can have the white space on the left, so here I've arranged all the text as one block with a half-line space between each section. The layout is looking rather bland, so I'm going to introduce a rule at the top of the card. The color is taken from the logo, and its white is the same as that of the L. With the introduction of this most basic of elements, we're employing another important design principle, repetition of shape, so white and color. This also gives me the opportunity to strengthen the relationship between the logo and the text block by aligning them to the same baseline. Rather than being at the top, the bar now could ground the piece by being at the bottom, allowing the white space to flow off the top edge. It's interesting what happens when we switch the elements. The same principles of repetition, alignment, and proximity are in play, but the reading direction is now disturbed. The hierarchy in terms of scale suggests we read the logo first, but the placement suggests we read the text first. Rather than the information flowing from left to right, it feels like now disparate blocks of information are trying to exit the page. So far I've been working with asymmetrical alignment, using left-aligned text and positioning the logo on the left of the business card. Let's explore alignment and repetition using the same business card example. Here I'm centering the logo and balancing the composition with one block of text to the left and one to the right. This approach has potential, but currently the logo is in the center of the card rather than being optically centered. The optical center of the logo is the space between the symbol and the text. Here I've moved the logo to the right so that its vertical white space is in the center of the card. I've then aligned the type to this central axis. The text on the left is right aligned and the text on the right is left aligned. Following this line of thought to strengthen the relationship between the logo and the text, I'm repeating the spacing value inherent within the logo. While the logic is sound, the result looks a little cramped. For that reason, I've doubled the spacing value above the text and I'm using a single space to differentiate the sections. Now, continuing to explore the theme of repetition, I've placed a roll down the left side as well as the bottom. This creates an L shape echoing that of the logo. I then modified the height and the width of these rolls. I'm not suggesting for a moment that this is the definitive design solution for the business card, but there are many other solutions, some of them no doubt better than this one. But hopefully you see that through the application of a few simple design principles, I've arrived at a better looking business card than the one we started with. This is going to be a full-page vertical ad for a digital magazine. So the constraints include the page size, which is 768 by 1024 pixels. So here are the parameters on the left side outside of my artboard. So we have to use the logo, the ad copy supplied, and the 4 photos from a possible 16. And I'll explore a number of different possibilities. So to create an interesting shape, I've combined 2 vertical with 2 horizontal images. I started out with a white background because the images are from different sources with different color palettes and lighting conditions, and I felt like using anything but a black, white, or neutral gray background would make things visually confusing. I'm using a gray rather than black for the text. This is suggested from the logo, and I also feel it looks a little more inviting and less stark than black text on screen. You can see how I'm attempting to create visual relationships between the different elements through the alignment of edges. I want everything on the page to relate to something else on the page. On the black background, I'm using a lighter gray for the text to ensure there's enough contrast. The black makes the images pop, but it might look a little too serious for the subject matter. I'm also concerned that my images arranged as they are driving a wedge with my text at the top and the text at the bottom of my page. So let's look at another configuration. So here I've restored the white background and set the text in the center of the page. This creates a strong diagonal tension between the logo at the top left and the informational text at the bottom right. My reservation is that the text is now trapped between the images. What I do like about this version is the strength and relationship between the headline and the tagline, with the 2 lines of smaller type sized to X height of the large type. Here I reverted to a black background, but rather than have the black background fill the whole page, I decided to reduce the height so that we create an area of white space at the top of the page. Arguably, this makes the page feel larger, and in an attempt to unify these quite different pictures, I've literally brought them together, removing the gutter that separated them. I don't think this was effective, and the mixing of horizontal and vertical image isn't working anymore. So this caused me to rethink my picture choices and my picture orientation. So I've switched from having 2 vertical and 2 horizontal images to now having all 4 horizontal images. So what if I made one bigger than the other? I've also changed the emphasis of the text by making the tagline much larger. To create white space around the text, I've added line breaks to make the text block taller and narrower. I've arranged the headline text in side-by-side columns, which, given that it contains numerals, has the unintended and unwanted consequence of kind of looking like a data table. Here I've moved the column of small images and the text beneath them to the right side of the page. But I wonder if it might look better with a light gray background because this will be viewed on screen rather than in print. White might be too bright. So here I'm aligning the bottom of this text frame to the image rather than the top of the text frame. These are just some of the variations we have when combining the principles of alignment, scale, and active white space. Before we can arrange the elements on our page, we need to address the spacing within those elements. Let's take a look at microspacing and macrospacing. Here I have 3 columns of text, and I want to point out some fundamental points about the spacing. So let's begin with the margins. These frame our page. If we're working with a print document, the margins provide a place to hold our page. They're not always symmetrical. In this case, the bottom margin is bigger because that's where the page number and magazine information is placed. For a screen document or something like a poster, they would more likely be symmetrical. For a 2-page print spread, the inner margin should be big enough to ensure that the information is not lost in the spine when the book or magazine is printed and bound. If working with multi-column text, there are also the gutters, which are the space between the columns. If these are too big, the columns of text will look like they are unrelated. If they are too small, the reader will likely read across them. There is the space between the paragraphs too, so this should be big enough to separate the paragraphs, but not so big that it disassociates the paragraphs. Related to paragraph spacing, we need to differentiate paragraphs of our running text, and this is commonly achieved with first-line indents. Here we have the space between the lines, or the leading. This should be big enough to ensure that one line doesn't run over the next, but not so big that the visual connection of the lines making up the paragraph is disrupted. As text gets bigger, the relative size of the leading will typically decline. There is this spacing between the words and the characters. This should be as consistent as possible to facilitate readability. These spacing elements are really fundamental that we can take them for granted, but when they're not there, we really miss them. The facing right page has the same text, but spaced poorly. The margins are so small that the text feels claustrophobic. There are no indents on the first line of paragraphs. Paragraph spacing has been added with multiple returns, creating big line spaces that undermine the visual connection of the paragraphs. There is no consideration of hyphenation, which is why the headline is hyphenated. And auto-leading is used on the headline, making the lines too far apart. Let's look at symmetry and asymmetry as it relates to the alignment of our body text. So currently the text in this document is left aligned or asymmetrical. This means there's an uneven amount of space on the right edge of the text columns. If I change the body style to an alignment of justified, we now have symmetrical blocks of type. To a large extent, the alignment of your body text is a matter of personal preference. In the case of this article, given its subject matter is about modern architecture, I felt like ragged or asymmetrical type was more appropriate. Working with justified type is the price we pay for a flush right edge, is the varying size of the spaces between the words. So the challenge here is to make sure this variation in word spacing is as imperceptible as possible. So it's not just a matter of changing the alignment, but also changing the justification of settings, the hyphenation settings, and working with optical margin alignment. So now I'm going to revisit the paragraph style and come and look at the justification settings. Now my letter spacing, which is set to add more space between the characters, and I felt it was appropriate when working with ragged text, but it's not going to be so appropriate here, so I'm going to change these figures. In addition to word spacing, I'm also allowing a small amount of variance in letter spacing and the horizontal scaling of the characters to achieve a consistent look to the word spaces. In addition to this, I'm also working with these hyphenation settings. A hyphen limit of 1 consecutive hyphen, so only words with 7 characters are allowed to break, with 4 characters before the hyphen and 3 characters after. So we are allowing hyphenation, but we're not going to have too much of it. So under the type menu, there's also optical margin alignment, which I'm going to turn on by clicking the check mark. So optical margin alignment gives a stronger edge, especially to the right side of the text column, but also to the left. So you can see that with optical margin alignment on, hyphens, punctuation stick outside of the text frame, so that optically the right edge is strengthened. So for this guided critique, I'm actually going to turn it over to you. So I'm going to upload 3 examples. One is a book cover. The next are the business cards, and the third is a poster. And for this exercise, what I'd ask you to do is, given that what we've just sort of been learning over the past couple weeks in terms of layout and composition, so applying those principles of like alignment and repetition, how we use those elements and apply them to the principles in order to make something that is visually appealing but also effective. So feel free to discuss why you might prefer one version over another one. I've obviously named them, numbered them accordingly, so you can refer to the numbers when you're discussing them in the discussion sections for this exercise. So give feedback. What ones do you think are stronger? Give reasons why. Which ones do you think are not strong enough?